Apparently, Spock goes a little cuckoo and kidnaps his former captain, steals the Enterprise, and takes him to the only forbidden planet in the Federation. Kirk manages to catch up to him and puts him on trial for his crimes. In order to explain why he did it, he calls upon an unusual witness that tells a story about when Captain Christopher Pike was once part of the Menagerie.
Hit it.
Where to begin with the guest stars in this episode? Let's first look at the cast of the original Star Trek pilot, The Cage, which the Menagerie is sort of an envelope that the cage is stuffed into. We got Jeffrey Hunter as Captain Christopher Pike. He was all over the place, mainly in westerns, though he did play Jesus once. Probably most notably is The Searchers, where he co-starred with John Wayne. But feel free to list your favorite Jeff appearance in the comments down there. Now, she ain't new to us, but she's in a different role. We have Majel Barrett as number 1. Star Trek blazing trails from the get-go with a female second in command. Very nice. Susan Oliver plays Vina, the woman trapped in the cage with Pike. Now, she was active in Hollywood from 1955 all the way to 1988. A lot of television guest starring roles in everything from Gomer Pyle to Magnum P.I. John Hoyt plays the predecessor to Dr. Piper, who is the predecessor to Dr. McCoy, Dr. Philip Boyce. Now, this guy was everywhere too, but he had a penchant for the fantastical. Starring in episodes of The Twilight Zone, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, The Outer Limits, and the original Battlestar Galactica. Peter Doria gives us a performance as a kind of proto-Lee Kelso in the role of Lieutenant Jose Tyler. He shows up in a lot of stuff, including Mystery Science Theater 3000 favorite Catalina Caper. Laurel Goodwin plays Yeoman Colt. She has only 22 credits from 1962 to 1978, but her debut was opposite Elvis Presley in Girls, 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 and she showed up in Get Smart, Beverly Hillbillies, and Mannix. Da-da-da-da. Rounding out the flashback cast is Meg Wiley as the Keeper. You want to talk everywhere. This lady went from 1952 to 1995 for 132 credits. But my favorite role of hers has to be as Maggie's grandmother, just called Granny, in The Last Starfighter. What about Granny, Alex?
Granny?
Here in the present, or the more future, we have Malachi Throne as Commodore Mendez. Now, he did a lot of stuff, including as Senator Pardek on Star Trek The Next Generation, the Centauri Prime Minister in Babylon 5, and was actually the original voice of the Keeper in The Cage. They redubbed the Keeper when they remastered the original footage for this episode. But that's enough guest stars, though. We've got a whole huge double episode to take on, so let's get into the plot. Kirk, Spock, and Dr. McCoy beam down to Starbase 11, much to the surprise of everybody there. Kirk says that Spock received an urgent message from Fleet Captain Christopher Pike, Spock's previous commander and the previous captain of the Enterprise, and the message said that they were to divert to Starbase 11 immediately. Base Commander Commodore Mendez insists that's impossible. Kirk says he trusts Spock's word on the matter, and Mendez says, that's great, but listen to me, it's impossible. I'll prove it to you. He takes Kirk and the boys over to the medical building, and in one of the rooms, they find a horribly scarred man in a wheelchair. He's unable to speak or even move much, and can only communicate through beeping the chair. 1 beep for yes, 2 beeps for no. This is none other than Fleet Captain Christopher Pike. So you see, this guy ain't sending nothing to nobody. Well, Mendez asks Pike if he wants them to stick around and hang out, shoot the breeze about things they think yes, and maybe some things they feel are more of a no thing, but Pike says no. Spock asks if he can speak with Pike alone for a bit, and Pike beeps, yeah, sure. Once everybody leaves the room, Spock says, you know why I'm here. I know it's mutiny, but I ain't got no choice. I have to do this. Pike just beeps no over and over. What's up with that? Kirk and Mendez are trying to figure out where the Enterprise's diversion message could have come from. Mendez just knows it didn't come from Starbase 11. He also notes that Spock has a particular loyalty to Christopher Pike. But Kirk says he's a Vulcan. He can't no more be disloyal than he could walk around without his brain. They spend a few more minutes restating that the message didn't come from Starbase 11. They really want to hammer that home. Meanwhile, the Enterprise gets a secret scrambled transmission from Starbase 11 that new orders are going to be sent directly to the ship's computer. Lieutenant Hansen, the guy who is apparently in charge while Kirk and Spock are gone, asks Uhura to get confirmation. As the confirmation call comes in, though, we see that Spock has been jacking with the Starbase's communications equipment to send these bogus orders. A tech comes in and sees what he's doing, and he earns a Vulcan beatdown for his trouble. Then Spock uses Subspace GPT to simulate Kirk's voice and give Uhura all the confirmation she needs. Then Spock gets on the phone and tells Hansen that the computer will take care of the helm automatically, so hands off and don't talk to nobody about this. In another part of the base, Kirk and McCoy are talking about what a shame it is that Pike is basically trapped in a disabled body, but he has all of his mental faculties, and for all the medical advances that they've made, they still can't heal him. Also, why is he just beeping no over and over? Well, just then, McCoy gets a call and finds out that there's a medical emergency on the Enterprise, and he needs to beam back right away. He tells Kirk, "I'll catch you later," and heads up to the ship. Mendez calls Kirk in and hands him a top-secret dossier outlining a mission the Enterprise went on to a planet called Talos IV. Because of this mission report, Talos IV was declared off-limits to everybody under the pain of the death penalty. The only crime for which the Federation still employs the death penalty is punishment. Only top-level command knows why. Commanding that mission was Captain Pike, and with him, Science Officer Spock. Speaking of Pike, Mendez's assistant, Miss Piper, decides to look in on our crispy captain and discovers he's disappeared. They try to contact the Enterprise and find out it's left orbit. Dun, dun, dun! Commercial break. Well, when we come back, the Enterprise is well underway. Starbase 11 is trying to call, but Spock tells Uhura to send it to voicemail. Then he tells the whole ship that Kirk is on medical leave and he's in charge. McCoy shows up and says, "Who the hell said Kirk needed medical leave, and where are they so I can kick him in the ass?" Well, Spock tells him later, "I need you to come with me. There's something I gotta show you." Well, they go into some guest quarters, and there's Captain Pike. McCoy is all WTF, and Spock pulls out another AI Kirk tape, which tells McCoy not to ask Pike any questions and do whatever Spock says. Pike is still blinking no. Nothing hinky about that. Spock goes back up to the bridge, and Hansen tells him there's a shuttlecraft following him. Spock tells him to ignore it. We'll cut to said shuttlecraft, the Picasso out of Starbase 11. Kirk and Mendez are in there, and they're trying to get the Enterprise on the phone, but it still goes straight to voicemail. Mendez says, "I think your boy is screwed." On the Enterprise, Spock is watching the shuttlecraft, and the computer informs him that the shuttle has already gone past the point of no return. They now have to pick up the shuttle or leave him for dead. Spock puts in a tape and runs the GoGetTheirAsses.exe program. The Enterprise slows to a stop. Spock calls security to the bridge and turns command over to Hansen. Elsewhere, Scotty is heard to go, "What?" Well, since McCoy is the senior officer on the bridge, Spock presents himself to McCoy for arrest on the charge of mutiny and owns up to all the stuff he did. McCoy tells the security detail to confine Spock to quarters. Kirk and Mendez beam up, and Hansen turns the ship over to Kirk, telling him all the stuff that's been going on. Well, once they're on board, the ship's engines start back up, but they're still under computer control and can't nobody do nothing about it. Like it or not, this ship is headed to Talos IV. Well, they have a preliminary hearing to determine if a court-martial is in order, and Spock says he waives his right to that hearing and actually wants a court-martial right now. Kirk says, well, we can't because there's only 2 officers of command rank on board, him and Mendez, and you need 3, so you'll have to chill out on that. Spock says, I'm going to let you finish, but there are 3 command officers on board. The Boolean fleet captain over there counts too. Mendez leans in and says, yeah, he's got you there. Pike is still on the active duty roster. Well, that's it. Court-martial time. Everybody hit wardrobe for a costume change and meet back here in 5. Well, with everybody in their Sunday go-to-meeting uniforms, the court-martial gets underway. The Enterprise is still hurtling towards the Talos Star Group, and Mendez reminds Spock that if they enter the Star Group, there will be another charge added to the list for which the penalty is death. Spock is like, that's cool. Mendez asks him, what gives? Why is it so important to kidnap Pike and go to Talos? Spock is like, is that an official question? Mendez is all, Yeah? And Spock goes, good, sit down, we got an episode of Star Trek to watch. Scotty pulls up the Talosian streaming service and uses Spock's password to log in. He wonders what Ichaya Lives means, but he hits play. On the screen, we see the opening of the unaired Star Trek pilot, The Cage. The camera swoops into the bridge from outside the Enterprise, and we see a younger and much less crispy Pike in the center seat, and we see Spock in need of a haircut and some eyebrow attention. No one else is familiar at all. Spock says something is headed their way. Kirk hits pause and asks Pike to confirm that what they're seeing ain't a fabrication but the true depiction of events from 13 years ago. He beeps once. He asks if they had a film crew and made a TV show at the time. Pike beeps twice. He asks Spock, what gives? What are we looking at? Spock declines to answer for the time being, and Mendez says they don't have to watch a TV show if they don't want to. Kirk says, I don't know, it looks pretty good. I want to give it a shot. Mendez says, oh, fine. And Scotty pushes play. The object approaching the Enterprise turns out to be a distress signal, an old-style radio wave. Apparently, the SS Columbia crashed on a planet in the Talos star group, and from the star date, they determined that it happened 18 years ago. It's an automated signal, and Pike decides not to investigate unless there's evidence of currently alive survivors, as they have sick and wounded that need attention at the nearby Vega colony. And afterwards, he heads to his quarters. When he gets there, he uses a Swatch jellyfish communicator and calls Dr. Boyce to his quarters. The doc shows up with a travel-sized martini kit and mixes a couple for the two of them. Says Pike seems like he needs to talk, and sometimes people tell their bartender things they won't tell their doctor. He asks if Pike's brooding about what happened recently on Rigel 7. Well, we don't get a lot of detail about that, but apparently things went a little pear-shaped and involved swords and armor. We also get the feeling a couple of the crewmen bought it on that mission. Pike says he's tired of the responsibility of being a starship captain, and he's thinking about resigning. Boyce is like, and do what, take up knitting or something? Pike is like, no, I could go home and be with my horse, or I could become a slave trader. Boyce is all, okay, that's kind of dark. At that point, Spock interjects on the intercom and says that they've received a follow-up signal that confirms there are living survivors on Talos IV. Pike says, set a course. Mendez pauses the show and says that it's really well shot and looks to be written pretty good, but he still doesn't think it's real enough. Spock asks Pike if what they're seeing is how it happened. He gets a single beep. Spock says he's going to release control of the ship if they watch the whole episode and still want to turn back. But they need to watch the whole thing. Mendez calls for a vote. He says, no, we're not doing this. Kirk says, yes, he does want to see how this plays out. Pike goes beep. Mendez goes, do. Scotty pushes play. On the screen, the Enterprise enters orbit of Talos IV. A landing party is assembled, and number one is given the con. They beam down and look around. A pretty desolate place, but there are these little loud-ass blue plants that put a big old smile on Spock's face. After looking around some more, they find the survivors' camp. Lots of old dudes and one attractive young woman named Vina. Just then, we cut away to show some big cabbage head-looking alien dudes watching all of this happen on a screen. Vina weirdly refers to Pike as a, quote, prime specimen, and one of the old dudes explains that away as Vina being raised by scientists. Boyce butts in and says that the survivors are all healthy, like suspiciously healthy. The old dude says there's a reason for that, and maybe Vina can take Pike off by himself and show him the reason and see if he thinks that the Earth is ready for this mysterious miracle health thing. Nothing hinky about that. Well, Pike goes with Vina, and she takes him to a rock formation that looks like it has an elevator in it. Well, suddenly Vina disappears, and the survivors and their camp disappear. The crew runs to tell Pike about it, and they get there just in time to see some Talosians come out of the rock elevator with their big old cabbage heads and knock him out and take him down underground. Spock and Tyler try to blast their way into the elevator, and while there's lots of sparks and explosions and wind for some reason, it's no good. The elevator doors hold tight. Spock reports up to the ship that the survivors were an illusion and the captain has been taken captive. Just then, Uhura informs the courtroom that Starfleet has detected that the transmissions are coming from Talos IV itself, which violates General Order 7. Starfleet orders Mendez to relieve Kirk and assume command of the Enterprise and do everything possible to cut off further contact with Talos. Mendez tells Spock that he's not only screwed himself, but Kirk as well. Spock still refuses to release the ship. Mendez declares a recess and leaves the courtroom. Spock tells Kirk that they must watch the rest of the episode. Kirk's career and Pike's life both depend on it now. Spock is led away by security, and Kirk broods all alone. Just before he starts a soliloquy, the words "to be continued" show up, and he decides against it.
1 week later.
Part 2. We're back in session, and Mendez tells Spock that Starfleet allows no contact with Talos IV. Spock is like, hey, the head honcho on Talos IV, the keeper, he's taking control of the view screen, so what are you gonna do? Scotty ain't there no more to work the remote, so the Talosians hit play instead. We see Pike awaken in a cage, and a group of Talosians show up. He tries to communicate with them, but they just look at him like he's a moron. The keeper talks to the other Talosians with his brain, but Pike can overhear it, making observations about what Pike is doing, as though he's giving them a class in 60s television heroes. The keeper ends with the declaration that Pike will soon be ready for, quote, the experiment. That don't sound fun. Up on the Enterprise, the main staff is meeting to talk about what they're gonna do about Pike getting snatched by them little bald cabbage-headed dudes. Spock has figured out that they must be able to project illusions into people's minds that are as convincing as reality. Boyce says they can probably read your minds too, and draw on your own experiences to scare the bejesus out of you. Tyler says they didn't get through the rock elevator with hand phasers, but what about if we pulled one of the friggin' phaser banks out of the ship and take it down there and hit him with that? Watching this, Kirk thinks, wait, we can do that? Number One says, great plan, let's do it. Back in the cage, the keeper causes Pike to be transported to Rigel 7, the incident he was telling Boyce about back on the ship. Only this time, Vina is there. Now, he's really confused at first, trying to get his bearings, but he surmises he must still be in the cage. Vina says they gotta hide because something's coming after him, and she runs off toward a castle. Remembering that this episode got dinged for being too cerebral, Spock steps in to explain that yes, Pike is still actually in the cage and Rigel 7 is an illusion. Kirk helps out by pointing out that that means that Pike can't control his reality. They both look at the camera and say, everybody got that? Though sadly that part was cut out in the final edit. Pike, now starting to wise up, recognizes Vina as the girl from the survivor camp. Suddenly, a weird Viking Mongol dude shows up, and Vina breaks character and tells Pike he's got to play along or the cabbage heads are going to punish him. Pike asks some questions and starts to think that maybe Vina ain't an illusion. Well, illusion or not, when Genghis Bjornsson over here comes in, Pike instinctually gets ready to fight. They have a fight, Pike wins. He and Vina are returned to the cage. Suddenly, playback stops because the Talosians have noticed that Crispy Pike has nodded off. Kirk reasons that this could indicate that the Talosians care about Pike. Mendez wants to know why. Spock says, spoilers. After a commercial break, playback resumes. On the surface of Talos IV, Number One is packing epic heat, and she's about to go ham on that elevated door. Ichiban over here don't play around. Well, it cuts loose, but same result. It gets all windy because phasers used to cause a lot of wind, I guess, and the door glows nicely, but it don't blow up. Boyce points out that they may have sheared the whole friggin' rock formation clean off and they wouldn't know it because the Talosians can make them see whatever they want. Well, down in the cage, Vina offers some information in exchange for Pike playing ball, picking her memory, and letting her live it out with him. He agrees and learns from her that the Talosians can't make you do anything you don't want to do, but they can make you see things and try to trick you into doing stuff. Also, they can punish you, but she don't elaborate on that. Chekhov's brain punishment over here. Pike wants to know why they live underground. Vina says there was a war thousands of centuries ago that made the surface uninhabitable, so they went underground. That's why it's so barren up there, and it's only now starting to be able to sustain life like loud-ass blue plants again. Since the Talosians couldn't explore or expand while they was living underground, they got complacent and focused on developing their minds. But it kind of acted as a trap. Living so much in their heads, they forgot a lot of their own knowledge, even how to repair the machines left by their ancestors. Seeking more entertainment, they started luring other beings in so they could read their minds and live vicariously through them. Pike wonders if, since they're obviously in a zoo, are they going to try to breed them? And if Vina's an illusion, where are they going to get a human female? Well, right as Vina is informing Pike that she is in fact real, the Keeper shows up, Vina screams and disappears. The keeper walks out. Mendez seems taken aback that Vina ended up being real and that Pike was captured as breeding stock. Pike's all like, beep. On screen, we see Pike starting to check the cage, looking for hatches or doorways he might try to jimmy. A panel slides open and a drink shows up, but he doesn't get to the panel before it closes. The keeper appears at the glass and tells him that the drink is essentially Space Ensure, with 18 essential vitamins and minerals and all this, but he's actually using his mouth to tell Pike this instead of braining it to him. Pike asks what happens if he pulls a hunger strike. Suddenly, he's in a cave with fire and lava and is in excruciating agony. Keeper's like, that's what happens, Mahatma. Drink your friggin' Ensure. Pike figures out, though, that since he has to cooperate and drink the Ensure, they must not be able to put hunger in his head. Weaknesses, aha! The keeper says, hey, there's way darker crap in your head that we could pull out and traumatize you with, so keep it up, Cowboy Curtis. Pike decides to drink the Ensure, but then suddenly charges the window and the keeper nearly wets himself. Pike is like, didn't see that coming, did you? Well, while changing his underwear, the keeper changes the subject and tells Pike that Vina is real and arrived in a spaceship crash just like they said. Since she's female, they needed a male to breed with her, so that's why Pike is here. So, get to it. Then he leaves. Suddenly, Pike is transported to a sound stage with Vina, a couple of horses, and a painted cyclorama. Remember when he told Boyce he liked to go have picnics with his horse? Well, here you go. Vina's in character as Mrs. Pike, I guess, and is trying to stay on script, but Pike keeps talking about the Talosians and wanting to know if they're expected to be slaves to these cabbage-headed Mamalukes and all this. He also tells her about charging the glass and freaking out the keeper. She says, yeah, they can't see through primitive emotions like hate, but that don't matter because you can't keep it up for very long. She tried, but they wore her down, and now she's just accepted the fact that they own her now. This clearly don't sit right with Pike, and he decides to finally stop being a jerk to her. Vina says she does feel kind of guilty, though, because they read her mind as to what a perfect guy would be like for her, and lured Pike in because he fit that image, so, sorry about that. Pike says that's okay, he thinks she's pretty hot too. Well, Vina realizes why the illusions haven't been working on Pike, because they're all things that he's done before. He's a starship captain, so none of this is fantastical in any way. Maybe if it was something he wanted to do but couldn't, maybe that would work better. Not sure whose side Vina is on here, but you remember when he told Boyce he wanted to be a slave trader? Well, suddenly we're on the set of The King and I, and Vina is now a green stripper. Yeah, too cerebral, they said. Pike just kind of sits decked out in bling with a dumb look on his face at a table with two creepy guys. One of them Starfleet for some reason, and all of them appreciating Vina's dancing. Again, for the doofs in the audience, Kirk asks Crispy Pike if that's Vina. Pike lets out a hilariously long beep. Mendez helpfully lets us know that Orion slave girls, which is what Vina is made up as here, are irresistible to human males. Thank you, Commodore, as you know, Mendez. In the fantasy, Pike looks to be proving Mendez correct because he's clearly appreciating the dancing. He suddenly can't take any more appreciating and leaves the main chamber. He finds himself in a stone corridor with space torches on the wall. Suddenly, the music coming from the main room stops and Pike sees that the way he came in is now suddenly a stone wall, and Metaphor Jones over here shows up carrying a torch. Cut to the Enterprise and another landing party is forming, this time to attempt beaming directly into the Talosian underground complex. Spock points out their readings could be an illusion, and they might be beaming into solid rock. Everybody is still good to go, though, so they step onto the transporter pads and they energize the transporter. But only number 1 and Yeoman Colt actually beam down. Always sharp as a tack, Spock is able to spot the common factor in those who beam down.
The women!
Well, the women beam into the cage with Pike and Vina, clearly interrupting their cave encounter. Sometimes it ain't easy being green. Vina gets honked off that competition has arrived. Well, without a word, Pike grabs Yeoman Colt's phaser and tries to shoot the glass. Nothing happens. Number 1's phaser is inoperative too. With hatred in his brain, Pike drops the phasers next to the little door the Ensure came through before. On her own thing, Vina says Colt don't seem like she'd be a good baby factory. Colt's like, thanks? Number 1 figures out the breeding scheme immediately. Vina says you'd suck at grumping out critters too. Vina's idea of insults is kind of weird. But number one does some math, saying Vina was on the Columbia's manifest as an adult, and that was 18 years ago, but before she can get past the equal sign, the Keeper shows up and says, since you ain't all about some Vina, here's some others to choose from. He says number one is really smart, and Colt is really horny. No kidding, that's basically what he says. But Pike spends the whole time being a rage monkey, keeping those primitive thoughts going. Keeper says, here, have a little hellfire for you, Captain Furious. Vina's like, saw that coming. The Keeper leaves, but Pike says he's going to keep on hating. Well, later, during nap time, the Keeper tries to sneak in that little door and snatch the phasers. But Pike springs the trap and yanks that little cabbage head-looking dingleberry out of the wall and starts choking him like he's Jabba the Hutt and Pike's wearing a brass dance belt. The Keeper tries turning into a murder monkey, but Pike ain't having it. The Keeper gives up fighting, but threatens to destroy the Enterprise. Vina says they can do it by tricking somebody up there into pushing the wrong button or something. But Pike banks on them being too intelligent to kill indiscriminately. But he grabs a phaser and tries to shoot the glass again. Nothing seems to happen, but he's wising up and he says he thinks he just blasted a hole in the glass and the Keeper ain't letting him see it. He suggests testing the theory out on the Keeper's big-ass cabbage-looking head. A hole immediately appears in the glass and everybody makes their way out of the cage. At this point, playback stops. Blank screen. Mendez thinks they just hung up on Spock. Spock says hang loose, it'll start up again. Mendez asks Pike if he votes that Spock is guilty. Spock talks to Pike saying this is a chance for life, you gotta watch the rest. Kirk says you said that before, what do you mean it's a chance for life? Spock says there's more, but nothing's coming up on the screen. Mendez asks again for Pike's verdict and he beeps yes, he's guilty. Mendez also votes guilty. Kirk reluctantly concurs. The bridge signals the courtroom that they are now in orbit over Talos IV. Spock says the Talosians are now in control of the ship, and they'll get the last piece of the puzzle now. We pick back up with the group getting in the elevator. When it takes them to the surface, they see that the whole thing is blown to hell. One of the phaser attacks must have worked, but they weren't able to see it. Number one checks in with the Enterprise, but can't get through. The Keeper says, ha, we totally wanted you to be on the surface anyway, so Pike can choose a woman and raise a family up here. They'll even help them out with some plants from out in the yard. Pike says, look, if you let Colt and number one go, I promise not to make coleslaw out of that big-ass cabbage head of yours, and I'll stick around and do the thing with Vina. But number one is like, hell no, and she sets her phaser for overload. Pike is like, damn, you go. The Keeper's all, are you being serious right now? Pike tells Vina she better get below, and to show he's cool, he tells the Keeper he can scram too. Vina says she'll stick around. If they have a woman, they might try again, right? Just then, two more cabbages come up the elevator, saying they just finished analyzing the humans' records, and they brain beam the results to the Keeper. He says the records show that humans hate captivity so much that even if it's cool and fun and full of green strippers, they still prefer death. That means humans are too violent for their needs, which is a bummer because they were their last hope. Now they're screwed. Pike offers cooperation. The Keeper says, no, then you guys would learn the brain illusion thing and wipe yourselves out just like we did. No deal. The Enterprise beeps in and Pike and company can beam up whenever they want. On the Enterprise, Colt and number one beam up. On the surface, Vina transforms into an extremely disfigured version of herself, which is her actual form. Turns out, after the crash, the Talosians found her all mangled, and they repaired her so that everything works right, but they didn't have a blueprint to work from, so she's all jacked up. The Keeper says he let Pike see a true form like that so that he would know why she wanted to stay. Pike is all, can you make her hot again? Keeper's like, yeah, we don't need to see that anymore. On the Enterprise, Pike beams in. They ask about Vina, and he says she's sticking around, and believe me, that's the best thing for everybody. On the bridge, Spock calls to leave orbit, Pike says engage, and we roll credits. Oh wait, no, there's a whole other episode going on. Kirk thinks about what he's seen, and right as he's about to ask Mendez if they can maybe reconsider, Mendez disappears. He's been a cabbage head illusion this whole friggin' time. Well, the Keeper shows up on the screen and tells Kirk they arranged the court-martial so that he would be distracted and wouldn't regain control of the ship too soon for them to get to Talos. He says Pike is welcome to spend the rest of his life on Talos where he can have all the green Venas he can eat. Kirk tells Spock, you could have just asked. Spock's like, yeah, hey Jim, want to face the death penalty? Great plan. Uhura calls and says that Starfleet has been seeing all of this, and they're cool with it if Pike wants to stay on Talos. Also, they drop all the charges against Spock. Kirk asks if Pike wants to stay amongst the cabbage, and he beeps. Spock takes him to the transporter room. The Keeper turns on the screen one more time and shows Kirk a young again Pike with a young and hot again Vina going down in the still busted ass elevator. All is well, and we roll credits. Great stuff. This episode is a doozy, full of lots of great stuff. I'll have to keep it to the top of the list. First, let's look at some great lines, starting with the cage.
You treat everyone on board like a human being except yourself. Well, now you're tired and you...
You bet I'm tired. You bet. I'm tired of being responsible for 203 lives, and I'm tired of deciding which mission is too risky and which isn't, and who's going on the landing party and who doesn't, and who lives, and who dies.
Now, you guys know I love when Kirk and McCoy have their existential conversations, like in Corbomite, and it's nice to see that this is a convention that Gene wanted in there from the get-go. It's also really cool that we start this show on the first episode with the main character already tired of being a starship captain and wanting to quit. That's a bold move. But it's great because this conversation potentially sets up a lot of stuff for both of these characters down the line. This whole scene is full of great lines.
So the Talosians who came underground found life limited here, and they concentrated on developing their mental power.
But they found it's a trap, like a narcotic. Because when dreams become more important than reality, you give up travel, building, creating. You even forget how to repair the machines left behind by your ancestors.
This is one of those classic sci-fi concepts that gets explored by a number of different works, and it's obvious this was something Gene wanted to explore because he revisited the idea of a civilization being driven underground and becoming complacent, losing their will to explore or innovate, and eventually dying out in What a Little Girl's Made Of. There it was robots. Here it's mental illusions, but it's more or less the same issue.
Each of the two new specimens has qualities in her favor. The female you call number one has the superior mind and would produce highly intelligent children. The other new arrival has considered you unreachable, but now is realizing this has changed. The factors in her favor are youth and strength, plus unusually strong female drives.
This could have gone in the Goof section too, just from the 60s-ness of it, but I love that the Keeper actually points out that Yeoman Colt is horny a lot as one of her strong suits. In one of the original lines in the cage that got cut out in this, the Keeper outs number one as having fantasies about Pike often. Gene was a really horny guy.
It's wrong to create a whole race of humans to live as slaves.
Excellent thesis statement and a great line to start a build-up to mass suicide and protest. But also a little rich in an episode where our hero fantasizes about being a slave trader.
We've tried questioning him. He's almost agitated himself into a coma.
How long will he live?
As long as any of us. Blast medicine, anyway. We've learned to tie into every human organ in the body except one. The brain. The brain is what life is all about. Now, that man can think any thought that we can. Love, hope, dream as much as we can. But he can't reach out, and no one can reach in.
A couple of things about this line. First, it's a great line because it succinctly sums up the issue with Pike in a way that makes it relatable and kind of scary. Also, it gives us a great insight into the state of medicine in the 23rd century, though we haven't established yet what century we're in. But there's also a problem with it, especially the no one can reach in part, considering we've established that the Vulcan mind meld exists. Yeah, Spock mentions it's a very rare and personal thing at this point, rather than later when it's more or less the Vulcan equivalent of a fist bump, but still, this is a high-ranking Starfleet guy, and Spock is like right there.
Mr. Spock, when you're finished, please come back and see me. I want to talk to you. This regrettable tendency you've been showing lately towards flagrant emotionalism.
I see no reason to insult me, sir. I believe I've been completely logical about the whole affair.
Pretty much the one and only joke in the double episode, ladies and gentlemen, and it's right at the very end.
Captain Pike has an illusion, and you have reality. May you find your way as pleasant.
Well, that's it in a nutshell, isn't it? A great line because it sums up one of the larger concepts this episode explores, and there is some discussion to be had around this, but we'll get to that later. Before that, though, what is probably the greatest line in all of Star Trek.
The women!
I don't know what to say about it. Everything about it is perfect. It's Spock. He's yelling, the women. That little squat kind of thing he's doing while shooting his arms out like that, it's perfect. It don't get better than that. But, moving on. The way they were able to resurrect the original pilot and give it the attention it deserves is definitely great stuff, too. The way they set up the envelope story of Spock trying to get disfigured Pike back to Talos IV and encasing the footage from the cage inside that envelope is really pretty brilliant, and is really well done. Also, they shot some footage for the beginning of Part 2 specifically to catch everybody up on what's going on in case they missed the first part, including this interesting Joshua Tree album cover thing here. It really works. I love it. This episode is firing on all cylinders. The Goof. Honestly, there ain't a lot of goof in this one. It's a pretty solid episode. Well, it's one solid episode sandwiched inside two other solid episodes, but there are a couple of things.
They found me in the wreckage, dying. Lump of flesh. They rebuilt me. Everything works. But they had never seen a human. They had no guide for putting me back together.
Ain't the Talosians humanoid? I mean, you'd think they'd get closer than that with their big, powerful cabbage heads. I know that internally things may not be in the same place, but structurally, humans and Talosians are pretty much identical, so what gives? Even if they didn't have a clue, they couldn't brain scan Vina and get some ideas from that? Not one of these guys is any good at friggin' jigsaw puzzles? They're close enough to Starbase 11 to put a fake Mendez on that shuttlecraft. Why not just read some of them people and see how they're supposed to look or something? One of them's gotta be a doctor, you know? Now, if you watch these shows with an eye for detail, like your Possum here, you may have noticed that there were a lot of actors in the cage that were kind of beat up. You got Tyler with his wrist all busted, the communications dude with a bandage on his neck, Spock is limping when he beams down. What the heck is going on? Well, it turns out these guys got all them wounds on that mission to Rigel 7 that Pike was talking about. But they're never directly referenced, so if you don't put two and two together for yourself on that, and I think you could be forgiven if you didn't, it would just look like they got all of their actors at a fire sale or something. All it would have took is Boyce asking Tyler after one of these meetings how his wrist is doing and how he got off lucky because that Mongolian Viking guy was pretty big. But instead, the bandages almost look like they're trying to make him not noticeable, and it comes off as being something we weren't really supposed to see. It's kind of weird. And one thing that is kind of funny to me is whenever they cut to a reaction shot of Crispy Pike. Somebody will say something, or they'll see something on the screen, and we'll cut to a reaction shot of a guy from whom the entire story pretty much revolves around the fact that this guy can't react to squat. To where the shots all just kind of come off as going, also, this guy is still here. It's just really funny to me. But that's pretty much all I got for Goof. Production. So I'm not going to get too far into the lead up to the production of The Cage and the whole genesis of Star Trek, which could be its own video, and who knows, may tackle that one day, but we do need to touch on a few things. While it kind of don't look like he's having a lot of fun on the screen there, Jeffrey Hunter was actually really excited about the show when they filmed the pilot. He told Joan Schmidt at the Los Angeles Citizen News, "We run into prehistoric worlds, contemporary societies, and civilizations far more developed than our own. It's a great format because the writers will have a free hand. They can have us land on a monster-infested planet or deal in human relations involving the large number of people who live together on this gigantic ship. Kind of makes you feel bad that it ended up not being in the cards for the guy. By the time the second pilot was ordered, he had made the transition to motion pictures and didn't want to be tied down to a television show. He was in Spain shooting a movie when the Menagerie filmed, so that's why Sean Kinney was in the chair for those episodes. The production of The Cage ran into a lot of kind of weird problems. They were given stage 16 at Desilu, where Cecil B. DeMille shot a lot of his giant productions. In order to get all of that Enterprise in there, they needed a stage where you could shoot King of Kings on, you know? Not the Jeffrey Hunter King of Kings, the one from 1927. The silent one. Yeah, about that. When Stage 16 was built, they didn't know from shooting with sound, so the toilets hadn't been soundproofed. Every time somebody went in to use the can, shooting had to stop until the flushing noise quit. They tried rigging up a red light in there so people wouldn't flush while the cameras were rolling, but how gross is that? People flushed anyway. Finally, they had to put a guy outside the toilets and just not let anyone in while a scene was being shot. They either had to hold it or find a bucket or something. And then there were the pigeons. Seriously, there was a whole possum-sized family of pigeons up in the rafters that would get all loud and poop randomly like my Uncle Ted whenever they would use the lights on the set. So they tried to get them out by turning off all the lights and opening the big soundstage door so they'd go toward the light, right? Well, that got rid of some of them, but then some were outside who were taking the opportunity to come in at the same time. You don't really think about this kind of thing when you think of producing a television show, do you? Well, the pilot took 16 days to film, pigeons and all, and Roddenberry said they spent more to build those sets than any studio in television had ever done up to that point. Plus, it was a really solid story with some great performances. So naturally, Gene wanted a way to salvage the work that they had done. Well, in March of 1966, after they had gotten their initial order of episodes from the network after delivery of the second pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before, but before regular production had even started, Gene was already suggesting they reuse the pilot like this. The studio agreed, but they stipulated that there had to be at least 50% new material shot for the two-parter, and they were only going to pay for it as though it was one episode, since they already paid for the cage. But it did mean that Gene and team could produce 2 episodes in the time it would usually take to produce one, and for less money too, meaning the show wouldn't be nearly as in the hole after these went in the can as they were before. It was a really smart move. Now, the director of record on the first part was Mark Daniels, who directed the Menagerie bits, and the director on the second part was Robert Butler, who directed The Cage. Now, as I already mentioned, Jeff Hunter wasn't available to reprise his role as Pike on this, so they got somebody whose eyes got as close to Hunter's as possible to fill in, and then they just charred up the rest of him as much as possible. That's going to be your Sean Kinney. Now, he got the promise that if he spent the whole show just sitting in a chair pretending he's listening to the Cherry Orchard on an audiobook at half speed, Gene would put him in the show later as somebody, who can walk and talk and all that stuff. And he made good on that. We'll see old Crispy a couple times down the road. Ruminations. So one of the questions fans have mulled over regarding this episode is, just when did Commodore Mendez become a cabbage head illusion? It had to be before the Picasso took off from Starbase 11, right? Which means the Talosian's ability to make illusions reaches at least as far as Starbase 11. That's a little alarming, isn't it? While we're on the subject, let's talk about the whole ban on travel to Talos IV. When you think about it, it kind of don't make sense. Well, if they're worried about exposure to Talosians, then clearly they need to move Starbase 11 a lot further away, because the Keeper can make a fake Commodore show up all the way over there and do whatever he wanted to do with that. In fact, it's only because the story wanted to keep the nature of the Talosians secret and have to go through the whole showing of the cage thing that they didn't do this, but honestly, Spock didn't need to go through any of that stuff with the fake orders at all. The cabbage heads could have taken care of everything pretty easily. So what good would a ban on travel to the Talos Star Group even do? At the end of the cage, the cabbages say they don't want to cooperate with the humans because there's too much danger in the humans learning their powers of illusion and destroying themselves. So it sounds like the Talosians are on board with the ban on humans traveling to Talos. Well, if that's the case, again, why is the ban even needed? If the Talosians are masters of illusion, they could just make Talos seem like the most uninteresting and crap planet ever anytime someone even got close to it. I know, and then we don't have an episode, but it's still worth pointing out. I think that it's interesting that the pilot version of this story was called The Cage, and the version with Crispy Pike in it is called The Menagerie. Well, they toyed with calling the pilot The Menagerie for a while, and I wish they had, because then you would have had a wonderful double meaning if you called this episode The Cage, right? Like, not only do we see Pike in a cage in the flashback segments, but his own body has become a cage of sorts in the present as well. And speaking of that, one of the big messages of The Cage is that humanity hates a cage. Like the Keeper says, even when it's pleasant, humans as a species prefer death. But is that actually true? I mean, it sounds good and noble and all this, but I'm not sure we can say that for sure. Not for the whole species, right? I mean, it's a well-traveled science fiction trope, to be sure, but I think that The Matrix had a bit more realistic attitude when it came to that. They said, yeah, for some people, that's true. But other people, like Joey Pants over here, would much rather live in luxury and an illusion than deal with the hardships of reality. And I'm sure that anyone with a strong opinion about anything is more than happy to speculate what kinds of people are in one group as opposed to what kinds of people are in the other group. But the truth is, no one really knows on that. And attitudes change all the time. There's a companion message to that, which serves as a kind of explanation as to why humans supposedly hate cages, that also gets touched on in The Matrix, as well as Star Trek episodes like the Paradise Syndrome and Star Trek V and whatnot, and that's that humanity needs adversity. Struggle is part of the human experience, and if you take it away, you take away what it means to be human. I'm not sure I buy that either. That sounds like something you tell people so they're okay with working their asses off until they're 70 years old. Believe me, if you had it all good and stuff, you'd totally hate it. Be thankful your life sucks, right? I think there is some truth to that for some, even most people, but definitely not for everybody, and I'm not willing to rule out a nature versus nurture kind of thing going on. Are humans that way because that's how humans just are? Or are humans that way because they've been told they're supposed to be? But what do I know? I'm just a possum over here. Now, I like Jeffrey Hunter. I think he did a great job in the show here. But I think the universe aligned as it should have when things happened the way they did and we ended up with William Shatner as Captain Kirk. One of the things Leonard Nimoy talked about with Hunter was that he played Pike as a stern and serious stoic, which didn't leave much for Nimoy to work with as a Vulcan playing opposite him. That's why we see a little more smiling and emotionality from Spock than we're used to seeing.
The women!
You can't really have your two leads out-stoicizing each other, you know? That would make for a very dull show. Well, as it is, the episode is probably the most serious episode of Star Trek ever produced, with Where No Man Has Gone Before as a very close second. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but when you contrast this with episodes with dynamic characters like Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Uhura, Sulu, Kevin Riley, Dingleberry Joe, you can tell the same stories, but they're a lot more fun to watch. So while I like The Cage a lot, I'm very happy with where the series ended up. But humor or not, and whether or not I agree with some of the messages of this episode, The Menagerie is probably the single most important episode of Star Trek, strictly in the context of the show itself. Now, there are episodes with much more important messages, and there are episodes that had a much greater impact on audiences and society and pop culture as a whole, but just from the standpoint of the series itself, this has to be the big kahuna. Remember, most people at the time didn't know nothing about the whole rejected pilot thing. Imagine what they thought, right? Here's a whole adventure that an almost completely different crew of the Enterprise went on, with everything looking like it's farther in the past. How crazy must that have been to see, right? We're only a part way through the first season, and we're already getting the sense that there's this rich history behind all of this. It's really an amazing achievement, and remains one of my favorite episodes of any Star Trek series because of that. Genuinely great stuff. So there you have it, The Menagerie. What do you guys think of this episode? Do you agree with the messages? Would you be okay chilling out in the cage with Vina and all the cabbage people? What about Pike? How do you think the whole series with Jeffrey Hunter's Pike would have been? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this stuff down in the comments down there. If you dug the show and you had a good time watching stuff with me, hit the like button so I know you dug it. Really helps the channel out. And if you're not subscribed yet, please consider hitting that button too so you don't miss all of the excitement of watching stuff with me, Possum Rob. If you're looking to support the channel monetarily, let me suggest hitting that join button and becoming a channel member. Members get early access to the audio commentary tracks I'm doing for The Expanse and Babylon 5. We're already a few weeks into the public release of those things, but there's about a 3 or 4 month backlog just waiting for you in the members only section if you want to check them out now. Plus, anything new I try, including some behind-the-scenes things that I'm thinking about doing, will be released over there first, so come have some fun with us over there. If you're more into a one-time kind of thing, please consider hitting that thanks button to throw a few quatloos in the tip jar so I can grab a dirty water dog or something. Another great way to support the channel is to head on over to adstudiosmerch.com and check out all of our possum-related fashion and accessories. Get you a coffee mug or a phone case or a sweatshirt or something, whatever floats your boat. You'll look amazing and you'll be helping out the channel. Next time, the crew encounters a giant bunny rabbit. Nuff said. Join us next time for Shore Leave. Until then, possum friends are awesome friends. Take it easy, all right? Later.